In Donald Trump's third indictment on charges related to his attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, there were unnamed co-conspirators mentioned, meaning people who aren't formally identified in the document, thus not being indicted at this point in time, but could be in the future separately and are relevant to the broader set of facts being outlined in the indictment because they were a part of the criminal conspiracy being alleged. And even though they're unnamed, many of them have been identified by the media just based on the facts laid out. And John Eastman is one of those people, the, as Mike Pence called him, crackpot lawyer that was around Donald Trump during Trump's attempts to overturn, potentially unlawfully, the 2020 election results. And I have now here for you him in an interview, and it's wacky and disturbing that this individual was advising the president of the United States. Not surprising because we knew it, but still always pretty wild to perceive. And he's defiant. This was around the time that Trump was experiencing this third round of an indictment, the arrest, the arraignment, and he is still justifying his actions as you might expect. And I just thought it'd be interesting to look at what he has to say in the wake of all this, and as he awaits possibly himself being indicted.
We are talking about whether we are going to, as a nation, completely repudiate every one of our founding principles, which is what the modern left wing, which is in control of the Democrat Party, believes, that we are the root of all evil in the world and we have to be eradicated. This is an existential...
What? Why do people say stuff like this? Show me the policies that Biden has pushed for that bolsters your idea there. You have a governing record to point to, as we talked about in the last segment. Are you referencing the lowering of prescription drug costs? Are you referencing the roads and bridges being repaired? Are you referencing the child tax credit? What are you referencing?
A threat to the very survivability, not just of our nation, but of the example that our nation, properly understood, provides to the world. That's the stakes. And Trump seems to understand that in a way a lot of Republican establishment types in Washington don't. And it's the reason he gets so much support in the hinterland, in the flyover country. People are fed up with folks, get along, go along, while the country is being destroyed. And so I think the stakes are much bigger. And that means a stolen election that thwarts the will of the people.
I want to remind you too, when people say that, there are real problems, absolutely. Real pain in this country and problems that need to be addressed every single day, 100%. The talking point, though, of Biden is destroying the country when he's overseen a pretty stunning and unexpectedly good economic recovery after an economic downturn that a pandemic caused and the pandemic that Donald Trump has handled. And so it's actually been impressive, his legislative record, the successes there, and some real achievements on that front. And then also the economic record is impressive.
Trying to correct course and get back on a path that understands the significance and the nobility of America and the American experiment is really at stake, and we ought to fight for it. Then there are no longer any impediments to them preventing us from ever having a fair election again, which means there are no impediments to them blocking the consent of the governed having control of the direction of the government. And we no longer are free people. Right. I mean, those are the stakes. And if those are the stakes, what?
You can hear in how he's explaining this why he feels justified in telling Trump to, or advising Trump to potentially unlawfully overthrow a democratic process. These are the words he uses to justify in his mind why he's on the correct side of history. Yeah, I'm going to try to be a part of a coup, but it's because the Democratic Party, the radical left, Marxist, communist, fascist, as Trump would say, are going to destroy us all and eradicate everything if we don't do the coup.
What are you supposed to do? Just sit around and twiddle your thumb? It would be too messy to do anything about this. I'll just, and maybe when the alligators come for everybody else, they'll eat me last.
Yeah. What are you talking about? Truly, what is he talking about? This is what really scares me. And I see it when I go to Trump rallies and talk to Trump supporters, and I see it in some of my interpersonal relationships and the perception of this country and the world that is just so far from what is real. And I know both sides fearmonger, sometimes hyperbolically so, about the other side. Absolutely. And that's been the case for a long time, and it's gotten worse, and it is a both sides issue. But you don't see whenever, for example, someone like me calls out the threat to democracy that the MAGA movement is. I'll point to specific actions I'm referencing, such as everyone agrees, even if they disagree if it was against the law or if it was justified or not, that Trump did attempt to prevent Biden from becoming president, prevent the peaceful transition of power, prevent the lawful certification, and just stay in the White House. Now, some people say that's justified because stolen election, they don't have evidence of that, but those are the facts. Those are actual facts I can point to and say, this type of behavior threatens democracy. And then we can have an argument about the facts when it comes to the stolen election claims, and those lies also threaten our democracy. What could he point to justify everything he just said about what the Democratic Party is going to do and the alligators are going to come eat you or something? My goodness. And then he gets asked, what next, essentially? Okay, so you overthrow the election, but then what? There's going to be massive protests. The military, I guess you're thinking you could invoke the Insurrection Act, or even just before that, the National Guard. Some within the military weren't super happy with Trump. What would you have done there?
You had to think through what would have happened had there been riots on the street. And it's
I should have said riots, not protests.
likely there would have been. So now, how do they get quelled? Normally it would be the military, but the military didn't show a lot of support for Trump in the 2020 riots.
Well, one hopes that our military still understands their obligation and the chain of command that stops at the top with the commander-in-chief. If Trump was the legitimate winner,
Right.
But he wasn't, though.
and you're afraid of saying that because of mobs' violence, then you're subjecting yourselves to mob rule, and that's not the rule of law.
Okay.
Think about how deranged that is. Seriously. We're going to try to overthrow a lawful election. We've failed time and time again in official venues to prove our claims of election fraud, but we're still going to charge forward. And a bunch of people in our administration are saying there wasn't the widespread fraud that you're saying there wasn't. And still we're going to charge forward and overthrow a democratic election. And then when there's inevitably riots based on that, because people usually don't like their democracy being thrown in the garbage can, we're going to, I guess, invoke the Insurrection Act and mobilize the military on the streets of America. And actually, there's some reporting from an individual who is now a former Army officer, Kevin Carroll, who talked about how terrified he was of this happening. As Mediaite reports, Kevin Carroll, a former Army officer who served as senior counsel to Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly during the Trump administration, laid out in stark terms on Tuesday a part of the most recent indictment against former President Donald Trump that has not received wide attention. Quote, Donald Trump's advisors would have put the U.S. military in the position of defying orders or turning their weapons on civilians, which is what John Eastman there, former lawyer to Donald Trump, is saying, well, they better have. Carroll begins by writing, as a veteran, my blood ran cold reading two particular passages in Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictment. He goes on to explain that in those two specific paragraphs, Smith details how then President Trump and the team of election-denying lawyers surrounding him laid out an autocratic plan to remain in power that would make the U.S. military choose between subservience to civilian control or refusing to undertake an anti-democratic domestic political role. And that line just really struck me, as is in the headline here. My blood ran cold. This ex-Trump official said of that part of the indictment. And so the idea of being put in the position as the military of following the chain of command, a direct order, or going against the anti-democratic coup attempt. And either way, there's disastrous consequences. And I don't envy that position. I'm glad it didn't get to that, but we got far too close because of people like John Eastman. We will be right back with much more after this.